Zexdora sat in the dim light of the shelter, his scaled hands shaking as he reached for the memory crystal. The younger Corvani around him had never seen war. They had been born after the Great Defeat, after their people learned to bow their heads when human ships passed overhead. They thought the old stories were just tales to frighten children. But Zexdora remembered. He remembered when the Corvani Empire ruled 17 star systems. He remembered when they called themselves the greatest warriors in the galaxy. Most of all, he remembered the day they first learned about the humans. The memory crystal glowed. As Zexdora activated it, images filled the air above them, showing the mighty Corvani fleet as it had been in those days. Hundreds of sleek warships, each one capable of destroying a small moon. The younger aliens gasped at the sight. They had never seen their people's military in its full glory. "We were so proud," Zexdora whispered. "We thought we were the strongest species in the galaxy. We had conquered world after world. Every alien race we met either joined us willingly or was crushed beneath our boots. We had never lost a single battle." The images shifted to show War Master Vekvar, the supreme commander of all Corvani forces. He was massive even by their standards, his natural armor gleaming black as space itself. Scars from a dozen campaigns marked his hide. He had personally led the conquest of 6 different star systems. Vekvar was the greatest warrior our people had ever produced. Zexdora continued. He had studied every form of combat known to civilized species. His tactics were flawless. His strategies were works of art. When he learned about a new world called Earth, he was almost insulted by how easy the conquest would be. The crystal showed the first scout reports from human space. The aliens around Zexdora leaned forward, curious to see their ancient enemy for the first time. What they saw made them laugh. Earth looked so small and blue, hanging in space like a tiny jewel. The human ships were crude things made of metal and fire. Their weapons shot simple projectiles instead of energy beams. Their military forces were split into hundreds of different groups that seemed to fight each other as much as any outside enemy. "Look at them," one of the younger Corvani said, pointing at the images of human soldiers. "They are so small and weak. How did creatures like that defeat our empire?" Zexdora's eyes went dark. "That is exactly what we thought. That is exactly the mistake that doomed us all." The memory crystal showed Corvani intelligence officers studying human warfare. They watched recordings of human conflicts, shaking their heads in disbelief. Humans fought in the mud like animals. They killed each other over resources, over ideas, over pieces of land that meant nothing to galactic civilization. They had been at war with themselves for their entire recorded history. "We saw a species that could not even achieve peace with itself," Zexdora explained. "We thought they were primitive barbarians. We saw their crude weapons and assumed they knew nothing about real warfare. We were so very wrong." The images showed War Master Vekvar addressing his fleet commanders. His plan was simple and elegant. Like all Corvani military operations, a massive show of force would convince the humans to surrender immediately. If they refused, a few precise strikes would cripple their defenses. The entire conquest would take less than 1 planetary rotation. Vekvar had conquered the Zenthari in 3 days, Zexdora said. The Zenthari were known throughout the galaxy for their fierce resistance. He had broken the Melike Federation in less than a week. The Melok had ships almost as advanced as ours. He was certain that primitive humans would surrender the moment they saw our fleet. The crystal displayed the first contact transmission. A human face appeared on screen, weathered and scarred, with eyes like chips of ice. This was Captain Jake Morrison of something called the Earth Defense Force. He listened to the Corvani demand for surrender without showing any emotion. "Your species will submit to Corvani rule," the alien transmission declared. "Resistance is futile. Your technology is inferior. Your military is fragmented. Surrender now, and your people will be allowed to live as subjects of the Empire." But human captain was quiet for a long moment. Then he smiled, and that smile made Zexdora's blood run cold, even now, years later. "Come and take it," Jake Morrison said. The younger Corvani around the memory crystal laughed at the humans' response. They thought it was funny that such a small, weak creature would defy their mighty empire. But Zextora did not laugh. He remembered what happened next. "We broadcast that response across our entire fleet," he said quietly. "We thought it was amusing. The crude defiance of a doomed species. We had heard similar words from other races just before we crushed them. But there was something different about this human. Something in his eyes that should have warned us." The memory crystal showed the first engagement near Mars, one of Earth's outer worlds. A small human patrol led by Commander Lisa Parker encountered Corvani scouts. Her ships were tiny compared to the alien vessels, barely larger than escape pods. The Corvani expected them to flee immediately. Instead, Lisa Parker ordered an attack. The human ships moved in ways that defied all military logic. Instead of trying to maintain safe distances and exchange fire, they rushed straight at the Corvani vessels. They used their own ships as weapons, ramming into alien holes even when it meant certain death for their crews. Lisa Parker's flagship was the last human ship in the battle. Her vessel was burning, her weapons were destroyed, and her crew was dying. Any civilized species would have surrendered at that point. Instead, she rammed her ship directly into the largest Corvani scout, destroying them both in a massive explosion. "She could have ejected," Zextura said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Her escape pods were still functional. She could have lived, but she chose to die if it meant taking more of us with her. We had never encountered anything like it before." Lisa Parker died. She had transmitted detailed scans of the Corvani's ships back to Earth. Information about their shields, their weapons, their weaknesses. Intelligence that would cost the alien empire dearly in the battles to come. The younger Corvani were no longer laughing. They stared at the images with growing unease. One of them, barely old enough to understand war, asked a question that haunted every survivor. Why would she do that? Why would she throw her life away for no gain? Zextera looked at the young alien with eyes that had seen too much. Because we did not understand what humans truly were. We saw their primitive technology and assumed they were weak. We saw their constant wars and assumed they were disorganized. We never realized that those very wars had taught them something no other species in the galaxy possessed. What? The young one asked. They had learned how to die well. More than that, they had learned how to make their deaths count. Every human who died fighting us took several of our warriors with them. They turned their own mortality into a weapon, more deadly than any gun or bomb. The memory crystals showed the aftermath of the Mars engagement. Corvani Command was puzzled by what they had witnessed. The humans had fought with a fury that made no logical sense. They had sacrificed valuable ships and trained personnel for minimal tactical gain. By all reasonable military analysis, it had been a waste. War Master Vekvar studied the reports with growing irritation. The humans were not following any recognized pattern of warfare. They seemed to care nothing for efficiency or preservation of forces. They fought like creatures with nothing to lose, even though Earth had billions of lives depending on their protection. Dektavar made a fatal error, Zextera explained. He assumed that human behavior was the result of poor training or desperation. He thought that once we applied enough pressure, they would break like every other species had broken. He ordered the invasion to proceed as planned. The memory crystals showed the vast Corvani fleet moving toward Earth's solar system. Thousands of ships carrying hundreds of thousands of warriors. The greatest military force their empire had ever assembled. They expected to be home within a month. Their conquest complete. We still thought we were hunting prey, Zextera said, his voice hollow with old pain. We had no idea that we were about to encounter the most dangerous predators the galaxy had ever produced. We thought their crude weapons and primitive ships made them harmless. We never realized that humans had spent 10,000 years learning to kill everything they encountered, including each other. The crystal's light faded as the first part of the memory ended. The shelter fell silent, except for the distant hum of the human monitoring station outside their settlement. Even now, years after the war's end, their conquerors kept watch over every surviving Corvani community. What happened next? One of the younger aliens asked, though his voice suggested he was not sure he wanted to know. Zextora's scaled fingers traced the scars on his chest, wounds that had never properly healed. Next, we learned what happens when a species that evolved to be perfect killers decides that you are their enemy. Next, we discovered why humans had spent their entire history at war with themselves. He looked up at the ceiling, where faint lights marked the positions of human patrol ships in orbit above their world. Next, we learned to fear. The memory crystal flickered back to life, casting eerie shadows on the walls of the shelter. Zexthera's breathing was heavy as he prepared to relive the next part of his story. The younger Corvani moved closer, their earlier amusement replaced by growing dread. The invasion began exactly as War Master Zekava had planned. Zekathora said, "Our fleet moved through human space like a storm. Their outer colonies fell within hours. Lunar base, their mining stations, their research facilities. We destroyed everything that could threaten our ships or slow our advance." The crystal showed images of burning human installations. Space stations tumbled through the void, their hulls split open like broken eggs. Escape pods scattered in all directions as humans abandoned their homes to the advancing alien fleet. It looked like every other conquest the Corvani had ever undertaken. "We expected the humans to ask for peace talks after losing their outer defenses," Zexthera continued. "Every other species had done the same. They would sacrifice their frontier settlements to buy time for negotiations. But the humans did something different, something that should have warned us about what was coming. Instead of fleeing in panic, human civilians began moving deeper into their own territory in organized groups. They took their children, their elderly, their sick, but they left behind every adult who could hold a weapon." The Corvani watched in confusion as humans turned their evacuation into a military operation. They were not running away, Zexthera explained. They were clearing the battlefield. They wanted to make sure that when the real fighting started, there would be no innocent lives to protect, no moral limits on what they could do to us. The memory crystal focused on Europa Station, a research facility orbiting one of the gas giant's moons. Colonel Ryan Brooks commanded the defense, a scarred human veteran with cold eyes and steady hands. The Corvane expected him to surrender when their superior force surrounded the station. Instead, Colonel Brooks sent a message to the alien fleet. "Europa Station will not surrender. We will fight until the last human is dead. If you want this place, you will have to take it from our corpses." The younger Corvani shifted uncomfortably at the humans' words. Their own military traditions emphasized honor and surrender when facing impossible odds. Fighting to the death was considered wasteful and primitive. "We thought he was bluffing," Zexthera said. "No civilized being throws away lives for a meaningless gesture. We believed that once our warriors boarded his station, he would see reason and give up. We were so very wrong." The assault on Europa Station began at dawn. Ship time. Corvani boarding parties cut through the hull and poured into the corridors. They expected to find frightened researchers and a few security guards. Instead, they found a fortress. Every corridor had been turned into a killing ground. The humans had used their research equipment to build weapons that violated every rule of civilized warfare. Acid sprays that ate through Corvani armor. Electrical traps that fried alien nervous systems. Explosive devices hidden in walls and floors. Colonel Brooks did not fight like a soldier. He fought like a hunter who knew his prey intimately. He had studied captured recordings of Corvani physiology and targeted every weak point in their biology. His people moved through the station like ghosts, striking from shadows and vanishing before the aliens could respond. They knew they could not win, Zexthera said, his voice trembling. They knew they were all going to die, but they decided to make their deaths as expensive as possible. For every human who fell, they killed 3 or 4 of our warriors. They turned their own home into a tomb for both sides. The battle raged for 6 hours. The Corvani slowly pushed deeper into the station, paying a terrible price for every meter they gained. Their superior weapons and armor meant nothing against enemies who knew exactly how to hurt them and cared nothing for their own survival. Finally, the alien forces reached the station's command center. Colonel Brooks was waiting for them, wounded and bleeding but still standing. His weapon was empty. His soldiers were dead. By all military logic, the battle was over. "Surrender!" the Corvani commander ordered. "You have fought well. Your people will be treated with honor." Colonel Brooks smiled. It was the same cold smile that Captain Jake Morrison had shown during first contact. "Honor this," he said, and pressed a button on his command console. The entire station exploded. Colonel Brooks had rigged Europa Station with every explosive device they could manufacture. Fuel cells, reactor cores, chemical storage tanks, everything that could burn or detonate. The blast tore through the Corvani boarding parties like a giant fist, killing hundreds of alien warriors in an instant. "He destroyed his own base just to kill more of us," Zextera whispered. "He threw away everything his people had built, everything they had worked for, just to make sure we paid a higher price for our victory. We had never encountered anything like it." The younger Corvani stared at the images in horrified fascination. One of them finally found his voice. "But why? What did he gain by destroying everything?" "Terror," Zextera replied. "He taught us that humans would rather die than lose. He showed us that they valued killing their enemies more than preserving their own lives. It was a lesson that echoed through our entire fleet." The memory crystal shifted to show the next major engagement near Jupiter. Admiral Kate Sullivan commanded the Earth Defense Fleet, a collection of ships that looked like metal scraps compared to the elegant Corvani vessels. She was outnumbered 3-1, outgunned 10-1. Any reasonable commander would have retreated. Admiral Sullivan ordered an attack. The human ships moved in formation toward the alien fleet, their weapons firing continuously, even though they were still too far away to do damage. The Corvani commanders were puzzled by this wasteful display until they realized what the humans were actually doing. "They were not trying to destroy our ships with their weapons," Zextera explained. "They were using their guns to accelerate their own vessels. They were turning themselves into guided missiles." One by one, human ships ran out of ammunition and redirected all power to their engines. They aimed straight at Corvani vessels and pushed their drives beyond safety limits. When their reactors overloaded, they became bombs moving at incredible speed. Admiral Sullivan's flagship was the last human ship in the battle. Her hull was cracked, her weapons were silent, and her crew was dying from radiation poisoning. She could have ejected, she could have tried to escape. Instead, she aimed her burning ship at the largest Corvani battlecruiser and pushed her engines to maximum power. The impact destroyed both ships in a ball of fire that could be seen from 3 moons away. She killed 800 of our finest warriors with that single act, Zextera said. But more than that, she taught us something that changed everything. She showed us that humans did not fight to win battles. They fought to destroy their enemies, no matter what it cost them. The images shifted to show underground laboratories deep beneath Earth's surface. Dr. Alex Chen worked frantically with a team of human scientists, studying captured Corvani equipment and biological samples. They were not trying to build better defenses or faster ships. They were designing weapons specifically meant to kill aliens. "Your people had been studying us from the moment the war began," Zextera continued. "Every drop of our blood that was spilled, every piece of our technology that was captured, every detail about our biology and our culture. You were learning how to kill us more efficiently." Dr. Chun's team developed biological weapons that targeted Corvani respiratory systems, chemical agents that could eat through their natural armor, psychological warfare techniques designed to break alien morale. They approached the science of killing with the same dedication that other species use to study art or philosophy. The humans began using these weapons immediately. Corvani boarding parties found themselves choking on invisible gases that their sensors could not detect. Alien commanders received transmissions filled with sounds and images that triggered panic responses in their primitive brain centers. "We started to realize that we were not fighting soldiers," Zextera said. "We were fighting an entire species that had evolved to be perfect killers. Every human was a potential threat. Their children learned about warfare before they learned to read. Their artists created songs about famous battles. Their storytellers passed down legends of great warriors." The memory crystal showed human prisoners being interrogated by Corvani intelligence officers. The aliens expected broken, frightened creatures begging for mercy. Instead, they found humans who seemed almost eager to be captured. The prisoners gave information freely, telling their captors about human defenses troop movements, and strategic plans. The Corvani were pleased with this easy intelligence until they discovered that every piece of information was false. The humans had fed them lies designed to lead alien forces into carefully prepared ambushes. Even your prisoners were weapons, Zextera said, his voice filled with old terror. They let themselves be captured just so they could hurt us. They endured torture and death just for the chance to kill a few more of our warriors. What kind of species does that? One of the captured humans was brought before War Master himself. The alien commander wanted to understand these strange creatures who fought with such fury. Zextera's hand shook as he reached for the memory crystal again. The younger aliens had grown quiet since hearing about the early battles. They were beginning to understand why the older survivors rarely spoke of the war. But there was more. They needed to know more. They needed to fear. By the middle of the war, everything had changed. Zextera began. We thought we understood humans after those first terrible battles. We thought we had seen the worst they could do. We were wrong. The humans were just learning how to fight us. What came next was beyond anything we had imagined. The crystal glowed to life, showing images that made even Zextera look away. The war had been raging for months now, and the humans had begun to adapt. They studied every Corvani weapon, every piece of alien technology, every tactical pattern their enemies used. But they did not learn these things to build better defenses. They learned them to create new ways to kill. General Mike Torres was the first to show us what human innovation really meant. Zextera continued. He led the attack to retake the Mars colonies. We had occupied those worlds for half a year. Our defenses were perfect. Our troops were the best in the galaxy. We thought the humans could never break through. The memory crystal showed General Torres planning his assault in the deep caves of Earth's moon. He was a small man with dark eyes and scars covering his arms. He spoke quietly to his soldiers, but his words carried the weight of absolute command. His plan was unlike anything the Corvani had ever encountered. Instead of attacking with massive force like civilized armies, Torres used tiny groups of human soldiers who moved through space like ghosts. They had stolen Corvani's stealth technology and improved it, making themselves invisible to alien sensors. They could appear anywhere, strike without warning, and vanish before reinforcements arrived. His soldiers were not human anymore, whispered. They had changed themselves. Surgery to alter their bodies, drugs to enhance their minds, technology grafted into their flesh. They became living weapons designed specifically to hunt us. The stealth teams began their work on the outer edges of the Mars colonies. They did not attack military targets at first. Instead, they focused on psychological warfare that no civilized species would consider. They left messages written in Corvani blood. They arranged the bodies of dead sentries in patterns that triggered ancient fears in alien minds. The Corvani garrison on Mars began to break down. Soldiers refused to patrol alone. Officers slept with weapons in their hands. The mighty alien warriors who had conquered 17 star systems found themselves jumping at shadows, afraid of an enemy they could not see or fight. Every night, more of our people died, Zextera said. Not in glorious battle, but silently, quietly, their throats cut in the darkness. The humans would kill a sentry and leave his body where we would find it. But they would move other bodies to different places, making us think our dead comrades were still alive and walking among us. The psychological pressure built until entire units of Corvani soldiers began shooting at each other. Convinced that the shapes moving in the darkness were human infiltrators, the Mars garrison destroyed itself from within, doing the humans worked for them. When General Torres finally ordered the main assault, the Corvani defenses crumbled within hours. The alien troops were exhausted, paranoid, and broken. They surrendered rather than face more nights of terror in the darkness. The memory crystal shifted to show another human innovation. Engineer Nancy Davis had spent months studying captured Corvani vessels in hidden laboratories beneath the Pacific Ocean. She was a brilliant woman with gentle hands and a mind that understood technology better than most computers. But she used her gifts to create digital nightmares. Your engineer had learned to speak our language, Zextera explained. Not just our words, but the language our machines use to talk to each other. She created viruses that could infect our ship computers and turn them against us. Nancy Davis's computer viruses spread through the Corvani fleet like a plague. Infected ships would suddenly turn their weapons on their own allies. Navigation systems would steer vessels into asteroids or gas giant storms. Life support would shut down without warning, leaving alien crews to suffocate in the vacuum of space. The worst part was not knowing which ships were infected. Corvani commanders began to fear their own vessels more than human weapons. They isolated their fleets, breaking up the careful formations that had made them invincible. The humans had turned the aliens' greatest strength into their greatest weakness. We could not trust our own technology, Zextura said. Our ships, our weapons, our communication systems, everything could be turned against us at any moment. We started fighting with primitive backup systems, throwing away centuries of advancement just to survive. The memory crystal showed deeper horrors. Dr. Chris Evans worked in facilities hidden deep within Earth's crust, places that existed in the deepest darkness beneath the ocean floor. He had been a peaceful researcher before the war, a man who studied diseases to help cure them. Now he used that knowledge to create biological weapons that targeted Corvani physiology. Your doctor had learned to make death itself, Zextera continued, his voice barely above a whisper. Diseases that ate through our natural armor, viruses that attacked our nervous systems, bacteria that could survive in space and spread through our air recycling systems. Dr. Evans's creations were invisible killers that could turn entire Corvani ships into floating tombs. The alien crews would breathe in death without knowing it, then spread the infection to every vessel they encountered. Entire fleets would die slowly, their bodies failing as human-made plagues consumed them from within. The Corvani tried to create countermeasures, but the humans were always one step ahead. Every time the aliens developed a cure for one disease, Dr. Evans would create 3 new ones. It was biological warfare on a scale that defied imagination. We started wearing full environmental suits at all times, Zextura said. We isolated sick crew members in space. We burned entire ships rather than risk infection. But still the plague spread. Still our people died. The memory crystal focused on the most terrifying human innovation of all. Commander Rachel Scott led what the humans called their berserker units. These were soldiers who had lost everything to the alien invasion. Their families were dead. Their homes were destroyed. They had nothing left to live for except revenge. Your berserkers were not warriors, Zextera explained. They were living embodiments of human rage. They felt no pain, no fear, no mercy. They fought until their bodies literally could not continue. Commander Scott herself had watched her children die in the first alien bombardment of Earth. The loss had broken something inside her mind, leaving behind only pure hatred wrapped in human flesh. She led her berserkers in attacks that seemed like suicide missions, but somehow always succeeded. The berserker units would charge directly into Corvani positions, ignoring wounds that would stop normal soldiers. They carried explosives on there, bodies turning themselves into living bombs. They used their own blood as weapons, infecting themselves with diseases that would kill any alien who came into contact with them. I saw one of your berserkers continue fighting after losing both arms, Zextera said, his voice shaking. She used her teeth to activate grenades. She headbutted our warriors until her skull cracked. Even when she was dying, she kept trying to kill us. The Corvani began to recognize the signs of berserker attacks. Human forces that moved with impossible coordination. Soldiers who ignored injuries that should have been fatal. Warriors who seemed to welcome death as long as they could, dragged their enemies down with them. We learned to retreat whenever we encountered berserkers, Zextera continued. Not because they were stronger than us, but because they were willing to pay any price for victory. They valued killing us more than their own lives. The memory crystal showed the final horror of human innovation. The humans had begun taking Corvani prisoners alive, but not for the reasons civilized species might expect. They were using alien captives as test subjects for their biological weapons, experimenting on living beings to perfect their instruments of death. Dr. Evans would inject captured Corvani with various diseases, then monitor how they died. Nancy Davis would test her computer viruses on alien implants and cybernetic systems. Commander Scott would use prisoners for combat practice, teaching her berserkers exactly how to kill aliens most efficiently. You turned our own people into laboratory animals, Zexthura said. You studied us like insects, learning our weaknesses so you could exploit them. Every prisoner you took made you more dangerous to the rest of us. The captured aliens were kept in conditions that violated every law of civilized warfare. They were given just enough food and water to survive, but not enough to maintain their strength. They were exposed to constant stress and fear, breaking down their mental defenses along with their physical ones. Some prisoners were subjected to psychological experiments designed to turn them against their own species. Human researchers would find each alien's breaking point, then reshape their minds to create turncoats who would betray Corvani military secrets. The ones who broke completely became something worse than traitors, Zexthera explained. They became human weapons-wearing Corvani faces. The memory crystal trembled in Zexthera's hands as he prepared to show the most terrible part of his story. The younger Corvani had stopped asking questions. They sat in stunned silence, trying to process what they had already learned. But Zexthera knew they needed to understand everything. They needed to know how completely their people had been broken. Everything changed when the humans came to our worlds, Zexthera began, his voice hollow with old pain. We thought we were safe in our own territory. We thought they would be content with defending their home system. We were wrong. The humans had learned something that no other species in the galaxy understood. They had learned how to hunt across the stars. The crystal came to life, showing images that made the alien survivors flinch. Human ships appeared in Corvani space without warning, moving faster than should have been possible. They had stolen alien FTL technology and improved it, making their vessels into predators that could strike anywhere in the galaxy. Captain Steve Mitchell commanded the first human deep space raid. He was a young man with cold eyes and hands that never shook, even when ordering attacks that would kill thousands. His small fleet had spent weeks traveling through the darkness between stars, studying Corvani supply routes and defense patterns. Mitchell hit our supply depot at Kepler Station. Zexthera continued. We thought it was impossible for human ships to reach that far into our territory. The station had enough food and ammunition to supply an entire battle fleet for a year. It was supposed to be completely safe. The human attack came without warning in the middle of the station's night cycle. Captain Mitchell's ships emerged from hyperspace already firing, their weapons targeting the most critical systems first. They destroyed the station's communications array, then its defensive platforms, then its docking bays. The Corvani garrison tried to fight back, but the humans had studied their tactics for months. Every move the aliens made had been predicted and countered. Captain Mitchell's forces moved through the station like surgeons, cutting out everything of military value while leaving the rest untouched. They were not there to conquer, Zexthera explained. They were there to hunt. They took what they needed and destroyed everything else. Then they vanished back into deep space before our reinforcements could arrive. The raid on Kepler Station was just the beginning. Human hunting packs began appearing throughout Corvani territory, striking at supply lines, communication networks, and isolated outposts. The aliens could never predict where the next attack would come from or when it would happen. We started pulling our forces back to defend our core worlds, Zexthera said. But that only made the humans bolder. They began targeting civilian installations, showing us that nowhere in our empire was truly safe. The memory crystal shifted to show a new horror. Dr. Helen Rogers had taken over the human biological warfare program after Dr. Evans was killed in a Corvani counterattack. She was a quiet woman with gentle hands and a mind that understood death better than life itself. Her creations made the earlier plagues look like children's games. Your new doctor had learned to kill entire worlds, Zexthera whispered. Not just the people on them, but the worlds themselves. She created organisms that could destroy the very air we breathed, the water we drank, the soil that grew our food. Dr. Rogers' planet killer weapons were based on Corvani terraforming technology, but twisted into instruments of ecological warfare. She designed bacteria that could break down atmospheric gases, turning breathable air into poison. She created fungi that could consume soil nutrients, leaving behind barren wasteland where nothing would ever grow again. The first target was a minor, Corvani agricultural world called Haven Prime. The humans released Dr. Rogers' organisms into the planet's atmosphere during what appeared to be a routine bombing raid. At first, nothing seemed different. The colonists thought they had survived another human attack. Then the dying began. The air itself became poisoned, Zextera said, his voice breaking. Our people started choking on every breath. The water turned black and foul. Plants withered and died in the fields. Within 3 months, Haven Prime was a dead world where nothing could live. The humans broadcast recordings of Haven Prime's death throughout Corvani space. They wanted every alien to see what happened when humans decided to make war on the concept of life itself. The psychological impact was devastating. We realized that the humans could do this to any of our worlds. Zextora continued. They had turned our own terraforming technology into a weapon that could murder entire planets. We were no longer fighting for victory. We were fighting for the right to exist. The memory crystal showed the most terrible moment of the war. Lieutenant Colonel Bobby Jackson led the human invasion of Corvani Prime, the homeworld of their empire. It was a planet that had never seen war, where billions of aliens lived in cities that had stood for thousands of years. Bobby Jackson was a veteran of every major human battle in the war. His body was covered with scars from alien weapons. His mind had been shaped by years of fighting creatures that most humans could not even imagine. He approached the invasion of Corvani Prime like a craftsman approaching his masterpiece. Jackson did not come to conquer our world, Zextera said. He came to break it, to show us that nothing we valued was safe from human reach. The invasion began with targeted strikes against Corvani cultural sites. Ancient temples that held 10,000 years of alien history were reduced to rubble. Libraries containing the wisdom of countless generations burned in nuclear fire. Art galleries that displayed the finest works of Corvani civilization were turned into mass graves. He was not destroying military targets, Zextera explained. He was destroying our identity, our history, our soul. He wanted to show us that humans could erase everything that made us who we were. The human ground forces fought with a combination of advanced technology and primitive savagery that broke alien resistance. They used captured Corvani weapons alongside crude explosives. They deployed stolen alien vehicles while fighting with knives and clubs when ammunition ran low. Bobby Jackson's soldiers showed no distinction between military personnel and civilians who supported the war effort. Factory workers who built alien weapons were treated the same as frontline troops. Government officials who organized the war effort died alongside the generals who planned it. Your people had learned that war is not just about defeating armies, Zextera said. It is about breaking the will of an entire species to resist. Jackson was teaching us that supporting the war effort in any way made us legitimate targets for human revenge. The memory crystal showed the capture of War Master Dekvar himself. The supreme commander of all Corvani forces was taken alive. During the fall of the capital city, the humans did not execute him immediately. Instead, they subjected him to something worse than death. General Amy Foster had developed interrogation techniques that could break the strongest minds while leaving bodies intact. She was a small woman with sad eyes who spoke softly even while ordering the most terrible tortures. Her methods could extract information while simultaneously destroying the subject's will to use that information. They did not just want intelligence from Dekvar, Zextera explained. They wanted to turn him into a weapon against his own people. They broke his mind piece by piece until he became their creature, broadcasting surrender orders to our remaining fleets. Dekvar's final transmission to the Corvani Empire was a rambling confession of defeat. He spoke of human superiority with the voice of a broken prophet. He ordered all alien forces to lay down their weapons and submit to human authority. The greatest warrior in Corvani history had become humanity's spokesman for surrender. Seeing Dekvar broken like that destroyed our people's will to fight, Zextera said. If the humans could break him, they could break anyone. If they could turn our greatest hero into their puppet, what hope did the rest of us have? The memory crystal showed the systematic dismantling of Corvani civilization. The humans did not rule through force alone. They used psychological warfare to make resistance literally unthinkable. They created programs that rewarded cooperation while punishing even the thought of rebellion. Dr. Carol Jenkins ran the Cultural Integration Initiative, which was really a massive experiment in mind control. She was a friendly woman who smiled often and spoke about peace and understanding. But her programs were designed to reshape alien thinking at the most basic level. Your doctor taught our children to think like humans, Zextera explained. She changed our education systems, our entertainment, our very language. She made it so that young Corvani would find human ways of thinking natural and comfortable, while finding their own traditions strange and disturbing. The humans established monitoring stations throughout former Corvani territory. These were not just military outposts, but research facilities where they continued studying alien psychology and biology. They wanted to understand their former enemies completely, to make sure that rebellion would never again be possible. Commander Gary Hall organized these monitoring operations with the efficiency of a machine and the patience of a hunter. He was an older man who had lost his family in the early days of the war. The memory crystal flickered one final time in Zextera's trembling hands. This was the hardest part of his story to tell, because it was not really the past. It was the present, the future, the reality that every surviving Corvani lived with. Every moment of every day, the war had ended, but the humans had not gone away. The surrender came on a Tuesday, Zextera began, his voice barely above a whisper. I remember because humans marked their days with names, and Tuesday was the word I learned to fear most. That was when President Danny Clark spoke to what remained of our empire and told us the terms of our survival. The crystal showed the final transmission from Earth. President Clark was an older man with gray hair and tired eyes, but his voice carried the weight of absolute authority. He sat behind a simple desk in a plain room, looking more like a clerk than the leader of the galaxy's most dangerous species. The Corvani Empire will surrender unconditionally, President Clark announced. Your military forces will be disbanded. Your weapons will be destroyed. Your people will live under human supervision until we determine that you no longer pose a threat to galactic peace. The terms were simple and final. No negotiations, no compromises, no appeals for mercy. The humans had won completely, and they intended to make sure their victory would last forever. He spoke like he was reading a shopping list, Zextera continued, but every word was a chain around our necks. We thought surrender meant the end of the killing? We did not understand that for humans, victory was just the beginning of something worse. The memory crystal showed Admiral Roy Peterson arriving at the former Corvani capital with the human occupation fleet. He was a quiet man who smiled often and spoke politely to the alien officials who met him. But behind his gentle manner was a mind that understood power better than any emperor. Admiral Peterson's ships took positions throughout Corvani space with mathematical precision. Every major world, every space station, every asteroid mining facility found itself under the guns of human vessels. The aliens were not imprisoned behind walls. They were imprisoned beneath the shadows of human ships. Peterson was not there to conquer us, Zextera explained. We were already conquered. He was there to make sure we stayed that way. His people began studying us like insects in a jar, learning everything about how we thought, how we lived, how we might someday think about rebellion. The human occupation was unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. Previous conquerors had ruled through fear or greed, demanding tribute or obedience through force. The humans ruled through understanding. They learned to predict alien behavior better than the aliens could predict it themselves, Dr. Carroll. Jenkins arrived on Corvani Prime with the first wave of cultural advisors. She was a friendly woman who seemed genuinely interested in alien customs and traditions. She asked polite questions about Corvani history, art, and philosophy. She seemed like the kindest human the aliens had ever met. Dr. Jenkins was the most dangerous human we ever encountered, Zextera said. Not because she killed our bodies, but because she killed our souls. She taught us to want the things humans wanted. She made us ashamed of what we had been. The cultural integration program began slowly and gently. Human teachers arrived to help educate young Corvani. Human doctors came to improve alien medical care. Human engineers offered to help rebuild the worlds damaged in the war. Everything they did seemed helpful and kind. But slowly, subtly, Corvani society began to change. Children learned to speak human standard before they mastered their own language. Students studied human history instead of alien traditions. Artists created works that looked more human than Corvani with each passing year. She was remaking us in your image, Zexthora continued, not by force, but by making us choose to become more like humans. She made us believe that human ways were better, smarter, more civilized than our own. The memory crystal showed the most insidious part of the human occupation. Commander Gary Hall established monitoring stations that claimed to be communication centers and research facilities. The humans said they were there to help aliens stay in contact with each other and to study ways to improve their lives. In reality, every conversation was recorded, every message was analyzed. Every thought that any alien shared with another was fed into massive computers that could predict behavior patterns with terrifying accuracy. Hall's machines could tell when one of us was thinking about rebellion. Before we knew it ourselves, Zexthora explained, they would watch our speech patterns, our body language, our social connections. They could identify potential troublemakers months before those individuals ever acted on their feelings. When the computers identified a potential rebel, human agents would intervene. Not with violence or arrest, but with subtle manipulation. The suspect would receive a job offer that required moving to another world. Their friends would drift away for reasons that seemed natural. Their family members would express concern about their negative attitude. The humans had learned to use social pressure as a weapon more effective than any gun. They could isolate troublemakers without anyone realizing it was happening, including the troublemakers themselves. They turned our own communities against us, Zexthora said. They made it so that thinking about resistance would cost us everything we cared about. Not because they threatened us, but because they made other aliens uncomfortable with revolutionary ideas. The monitoring system reached into every aspect of alien life. Human observers attended cultural events, recording which traditions might inspire dangerous thoughts of independence. They studied alien art, literature, and music, identifying themes that might encourage resistance. Slowly, these cultural elements began to disappear, not through censorship or banning, but through lack of interest. Young aliens found traditional stories boring compared to human entertainment. Ancient songs seemed primitive next to human music. Traditional art looked crude compared to human masterpieces. You were erasing us without firing a single shot, Zexthora continued. You were making us choose to forget who we had been. And the worst part was that we were grateful for it. We thought you were helping us become better than we had been. The memory crystal showed the human education system that had replaced traditional Corvain schooling. Children learned that their ancestors had been primitive warmongers who threatened galactic peace. They studied human philosophy that emphasized cooperation and submission to authority. They practiced human sports that discouraged individual aggression. Teacher Linda Brown ran the education program on Corvani Prime. She was a patient woman who seemed to genuinely care about her alien students. She taught them to read human literature, to appreciate human art, to think in human concepts about justice and morality. Ms. Brown taught our children that violence was always wrong. Zexthora explained that cooperation was better than competition, that individual desires should be sacrificed for the good of the community. She made peaceful slaves of our warriors. The children who graduated from human schools were nothing like their parents. They spoke softly, avoided conflict, and showed deep respect for human authority. They found their own cultural traditions embarrassing and primitive. They wanted to be more human than Corvani. We watched our own offspring become strangers to us, Zexthora said. They looked like us, but they thought like humans. They valued human ideas over alien wisdom. They were more loyal to their human teachers than to their own families. The transformation was so complete that when old veterans like Zexthora tried to tell stories about the glory days of the Corvani Empire, their own children would correct them. The young aliens would explain patiently that their ancestors had been ignorant and violent, that human guidance had saved them from their own primitive nature. Captain Ben Harris commanded the human patrol fleet that maintained order throughout former Corvani space. His ships moved through alien territory like guardian angels, protecting trade routes and preventing conflicts between different species. To the younger generation of aliens, he was a hero who kept the peace. Harris and his people were not protectors, Zextera explained. They were wardens. They made sure that we never forgot who held the real power in this part of the galaxy. Their ships were always visible, always present, always ready to remind us of our place. The human patrols intervened in any dispute that might lead to violence. They mediated trade disagreements, settled territorial claims, and prevented conflicts before they could escalate. To most aliens, this seemed like benevolent peacekeeping, but Zextera understood the deeper message. The humans were demonstrating that aliens could not be trusted to solve their own problems, that without human supervision, the galaxy would return to the chaos and violence of the old days. You made us dependent on your protection, he said. You taught us that we needed humans to keep us from destroying ourselves. You turned us into children who could not survive without constant supervision. The memory crystal began to fade, but before it went dark, it showed one final image. A group of young Corvani on a distant colony world, playing human games and singing human songs. They looked happy and peaceful, completely content with their lives under human rule. This is why I tell these stories, Zextera said to the younger aliens around him.